Kia ora and welcome to another NZARM webinar. Today we are lucky enough to have Francie Aitken here to present a webinar on how to activate your mindset to make working motherhood easier. Francie is an ICF certified coach and NLP practitioner, an Olympic rowing coxswain, and of course a mum. Before I hand over to Francie, if you have any questions or comments throughout the webinar, could you please put them into the chat? It'll be quite an interactive session, so it'd be great to have your involvement. And if we don't answer your questions, we'll get to answer them towards the end. But no, thank you very much for joining, and I'll hand over to you, Francie.
Thanks, Eliza. And it's so awesome to be here with all of you folks on the call. Like Eliza said, I love for this to be a two-way conversation. I don't want it to feel like I'm just talking to myself. So if you feel like popping your cameras on, that would be great. And we're going to use that chat box. I ran this webinar in Hamilton last week, and we came out of it, oh, look at these beautiful faces. We came out of it having some really honest, real vulnerable conversations, and I know we can also create that same sort of virtual space today. And to warm up our virtual room, and I know many of you replied to the questionnaire that was sent out with the registration, but I'd love for you to put into the chat box, what's one word that comes to mind when you think about working motherhood or working parent, balancing parenting and motherhood and work? What's one word that comes to mind? Juggle, juggle, yeah. Juggling. Maybe we should go to the circus. Juggle, yeah. Overwhelming. Yeah, juggle. I think, the juggle is something we all definitely feel. And today we're not going to be able to eliminate that juggle, but we will lighten the load of that juggle. A balance, yeah, that's a beautiful word as well. Fatigue, yeah, all of it is really real. And today I'm not here to give you any parenting advice. I think most of you on the call will probably have more parenting advice. Instead, I'm here to talk you through how can we activate the power of our mind to lighten that juggle, to lighten that balance, to make things feel a little bit easier. All right, let's dive into the content. I'm just going to bring that up. I'm assuming everyone can see that. Yep. Cool. All right. So as I said today is not about the highlight reel of parenting. We see enough of this on social media, right? This is me with my 19-month-old daughter, Elsie, and I'm currently 37 weeks pregnant with number 2. We're not going to talk about the highlight reels because we know when we're in the highlight reel of parenting, we enjoy those blissful moments. It's easy, it's fun. Instead, today, we're going to talk about how can we create more capacity in these moments. And maybe you have older kids, maybe you have younger kids, but maybe you'll remember what it's like when, work feels overwhelming, when there's a lot to do on your to-do list, when you're running late, and then the kids decide, oh, today's the day that I really don't want to get in my car seat, or I don't want to do what you're asking me to do. And today loves the crumbs in the car seat. Yes, total reality. That's how it is. And today what we're going to talk about is how can we increase our capacity? And I want to just talk about what do I actually mean by that. So a few Mondays ago, and I don't work on a Monday, I had one of those days or moments where I wasn't proud of myself. Getting Elsie out of her pajamas in the morning felt like World War III. And then we decided we'd go off for our morning walk in the pram, and getting Elsie into the pram felt like a nuclear bomb was going to go off. And inside of myself, I felt my capacity shrink and shrink and shrink, and my frustration build up and up and up. And I snapped in a way that I didn't feel proud of. But then I had a choice. And this is the choice we're going to activate today. I could have shamed myself. I could have said, I'm a bad mum. Why did I do that? Why can't I hold it all together? and beaten myself up, and then got stuck in this mum guilt shaming loop, and then spent the rest of the day trying to make it up to Elsie, maybe giving her her favorite treats, maybe trying to play with her more because I was trying to make it up to her because I had snapped. Instead, when that happened, I chose to be curious. I paused and I got curious, and I noticed actually in the weekend I had a full 2-day course. No wonder I was at capacity. I was about 30 weeks pregnant, and my toddler was being frustrating. And so in that moment when I paused, I just also realized I had so much emotion that I was holding on to, and I let that emotion go with tears. And when I let that emotion go with tears, I realized, this rupture that I've created is an opportunity for repair, and is an opportunity for me to even teach my 19-month-old, hey, I'm a human being, not a human doing. Mummy makes mistakes, and the greatest thing we can do is apologize and accept our responsibility. And then I moved through the day with lightness. I didn't hold on to that mum guilt. I released it. And at the end of the day, I talked about it with my husband, and I turned towards it. And I got curious, what was my trigger? Because when we can turn towards our triggers, they are our trailheads to freedom. And for me, I found, oh, what was the underlying cause here? And how can I bring a little bit more capacity? So I'd love to know, maybe just drop into the chat box. Is this something that resonates with you? Those moments where you get frustrated, maybe you rupture as a mum, maybe you snap at the kids, and we can often find ourselves beating ourselves up, and it can feel overwhelming. I'd love to know, is that something that you can also relate to? Yeah, cool. I can see, yes, 100% true. Awesome. Now, one thing I want to leave us with as we start this workshop is integration over information. The most successful people I work with, or the most successful people I know in life, know this. They know they could gather more information from workshops like this, from podcasts, from books, from doing more courses, but they know information is no longer the most powerful thing in our lives. The most powerful thing in our lives is when we make the choice to integrate the information. Maybe it's into our daily practices, maybe it's into our daily habits. But when we make the choice to integrate it, that's when something changes. And I would love to know from you, again, we're going to use that chat box, on a scale of 1 to 10, how willing are you to take something small from today and integrate it? Maybe you want to take something big, maybe you want to take something small. So on a scale of 1 to 10, just pop in there almost as a personal accountability measure. How interested are you, or how willing are you to take something from today and integrate it? Yeah. So 10 from Sarah, I love that. What else? Maybe you want to write it down on a piece of paper. Maybe you want to put it in the chat box, but 10. Cool. And I want you to hold on to that because we're going to come back to it. Now, as I said, I'm Francie Aitken. I'm a mindset coach for mums and high-performing women, and I predominantly work with mums to help them lighten the invisible load, ditch the mum guilt, and live life on their terms. All right, we're going to dive into the content. So when I became a mindset coach for mums, and I've been a life coach and a workplace coach for 8 years, I started to notice that all of my friends who were mums around me, and mums maybe with older children, maybe with teenage children, were bogged down by this invisible load. It's something I had completely no idea of before I became a mother. And I was like, what is this invisible load? What is making it so heavy? And it's a question I asked myself and I got really curious with. And I want to ask you now, just pop in that chat box, what makes the invisible load so heavy for you? So it was a question I got curious, but I'd love to know from you, what makes the invisible load so heavy? It's unseen. Yeah, I love that, Amy. What else? My husband couldn't understand it. It's never ending. Yeah. I'm a sole parent. I have the entire load. That's so true, Nicole. Yep. Endless to-do list. Yes. What I'm really pulling out here is it's relentless, it's ongoing, and it's invisible, so no one else sees it. And these are the things I noticed about the invisible load. But when I got a little bit more curious, I was like, what actually is it? And how I broke this down was into a metaphor that I'm going to share with you now. And I want us to think about the invisible load like an iceberg. So we have the top of the iceberg, and I want you to think about like the top of the iceberg you would see above the water, like our conscious mind. These are the things people can see us are doing. The physical load is what we need to do to keep our household running. So this is meals, this is groceries, this is washing, bathing our kids, buying clothes, running them around to different sports events. This is the thing we physically see. And this sort of sits in our consciousness. We know it's there. Now, just below the waterline, and also just below our consciousness, we have what I call the cognitive load of the invisible load. This is what I call the planning, the organizing, and the making sure everyone is happy. So if I ask you questions like, who is the first person in the household who turns towards your kids when they're upset? Or they've come home from school and you notice something is off. Who's that first person? Or who's the first person in your relationship to organize a date night? Or who's the first person in your household to make sure the kids have play dates sorted? Or if today, like teachers are striking, organizing something for that. This is the cognitive load. It's everything we need to keep track of mentally to keep our households functioning, to keep our families happy and thriving. So that's the cognitive load. But what I realized as I got really curious with this question of what is the invisible load, I noticed there was a bit at the bottom that no one is talking about. And I call this the pressure load. This is the expectation and pressure we put on ourselves, particularly when we're strong, independent women and we thrive in our careers and we thrive around being able to make things happen, being able to fix things, being the person who comes up with solutions. We put this pressure on ourselves. And this pressure often sounds like, and I'll go through it in a little bit more detail, it often sounds like it comes from a place of wanting to be the best mum we can, as well as wanting to show up in our careers in the best way we can. Now, here's the thing about this invisible load. The first part, the physical load, you have no choice. I'm sorry. That's part of parenthood. We need to do that first load, but we can lighten that load. We can use something called the fair play system, which is a system I really love, which helps us have conversations between us and our partners to share that load. So we can share it, we can lighten a little bit. Again, the cognitive load, it's a load we don't have a choice to let go of, but we can use things like the wonderful PAM app, which is an amazing New Zealand AI app that you can put things in like school newsletters, daycare newsletters, after school activities, and it'll go through that and the AI will put into your calendar and reminders what you need to do. So we can start to use technology to lighten that cognitive load. But the pressure load, the load that sits at the bottom, that weighs us down through our expectations and the pressure we put on ourselves, that's the load we truly have a choice to let go of. And when we can let go of that, we can start to lighten the load of working motherhood and bring some capacity back. And that's what we're really going to dive into. How can we lighten this pressure load? And so let's get a little bit curious. What is this pressure load I'm talking about? Well, this invisible pressure often sounds like this. You might be driving to pick the kids up from work, pick the kids up from daycare after work, but mentally preparing and thinking, what's tonight going to bring? You know, might your kids make you feel guilty that you have left them in after school daycare? Maybe your kids are at daycare and they're young and they're going to be tired and you're mentally thinking, what's going to happen? Or maybe you're playing with your kids or you're doing homework with your kids, but you're telling yourself, I should be more present. Why am I still thinking about work? Maybe you're replaying a work meeting. Maybe you're wondering about what an email response is. And then that final part is looking calm while your child refuses dinner. You know, when last night chicken was the favorite thing, and then tonight, like, chicken is the worst thing in the world, and inside you're blowing up. This is the invisible pressure we put on ourselves. It sounds like that constant mental chatter from our inner critic. And I'd love for you to pop in the chat box, can you relate? Maybe it's not these examples, but can you relate to a sense of, maybe there is pressure here from that little voice inside of my head that takes me down those mental loops? Just love to know in the chat box, can you relate? So here's the thing about that little voice inside of our head, or that pressure we put on ourselves. Many of the high performing mums and women I work with tell me no one on the outside would know. It's almost like we wear a mask, because on the outside, people often see us as the mothers who are holding it all together. Maybe we're the first to volunteer for soccer. Maybe we're the first to volunteer for after school activities. Maybe we're the first to be there in our work capacity and take on those extra responsibilities. So no one would know. On the outside, we're still showing up as that successful woman. But inside, it feels exhausting, and it feels like we're wearing the mask. And here's the thing, when we're wearing a mask on the outside, we place on the inside, what's happening is we're placing an enormous pressure on ourselves to meet our own expectations. And these expectations, as I talked about from that pressure load, often come from our inner critic. And when we are these strong, independent women, and we're so used to being the ones who can solve everything for everyone else, being the person who's resourceful, being the person who comes up with creative solutions, we feel like we almost need our inner critic. We almost feel like we need that little voice in our head that tells us that unless I'm here, you won't be motivated. You will make a mistake. So that pressure almost becomes so familiar to us. And that pressure, when it becomes so familiar to us, creates what I call a low-level stress state. And that low-level stress state creates some tension. And that tension comes from the expectations we put on ourselves, from being that strong, independent woman, from putting that pressure on. And what happens when life throws us curveballs, or our kids don't behave in a way that we think we're going to behave? We get frustrated. Our expectations don't get met. And then our inner critic pops up, and it starts to take us down negative spirals of self-doubt, maybe mum guilt, maybe shame. And it creates, as I said, this low-level stress response. But as I said before, no one would know. On the outside, we're often holding it together, but in the inside, we're stuck in these loops, adding pressure on ourselves. And this is kind of what it can look like. It can look like from the inner critic saying things to yourself of, other mums are managing work, kids, and life. Why are you struggling? That language of, you should be able to do it all. Or maybe you've snapped at your kids like I did with Elsie in the pram, and you say to yourself, what's wrong with me? What's wrong with you? Why did you do that? Why can't you hold it all together? Or you come home at the end of the day and you're totally exhausted, and you say to yourself, I should have more energy and capacity available for the kids, but you don't. And so this is often what our inner critic sounds like. And when we're constantly in this low-level stress state from our inner critic, our brains start to operate from a place of what I call survival mode. Because our brains and our nervous system can't tell the difference between a real threat, so maybe getting chased by a lion and a tiger, an earthquake or a car accident, or a perceived threat. And the constant judgment, pressure, and fear that our inner critic often places on us creates that same stress response. And when we are in that same low-level stress response, what happens is our ability to respond diminishes. We react. we start to lose our ability to creatively think of ways to move through challenging parenting situations. We start to become a lot more critical and a lot more controlling. And that's because our nervous system is almost in a hypervigilant state because we have created a low level stress state just simply through our words and the pressure we're putting on ourselves. And here's subtle signs that you might be in survival mode or in a low level stress state, because so often we're so busy, we lose touch with actually what is survival mode. So the first one is snapping at the little things, maybe more than you would like, and then you feel guilty, and then you shame yourself. Why did I do that? What's wrong with me? Another key thing is often lying in bed at night where you're wired and tired, but your mind is thinking about, did I get the meat out for tomorrow? What are we going to have for dinner? Oh, what have I got to think about for that meeting tomorrow? Maybe you're starting to just play through in your mind how you might respond to different people, how you might respond to clients, how you might respond to emails. And the last subtle sign of survival mode that I often see mums is staying busy with a never-ending to-do list. And that might be work things and home things, because slowing down feels uncomfortable. So we know we should slow down. We know we should take some time for ourselves, but there's often that constant guilt and chatter from our inner critic that says, keep being busy, keep doing all of the things. And these are subtle signs that we're in survival mode, often coming from the pressure we're putting on ourselves through the dialogue of our inner critic. And now I'm going to invite you to get a little bit curious with it. I've done enough talking. And I'm going to ask you this question, and I want you to take a few minutes to think about it. So I want you to think about a moment, maybe it's today, maybe it's from the last week with your kids, where you felt stressed, guilty, or like you weren't doing enough. And I want you just to get curious with yourself right now. What did you say in that moment? What was your inner talk? So I want you just to reflect and write it down, maybe on a piece of paper. Maybe you want to put it in the chat box. But what did you say to yourself in that moment? What was going on for you when you felt stressed, overwhelmed, guilty? Yeah, I love, thanks Nicole and Kate for starting to kick us off. I love what you're putting in here. I should have sorted this by now. Going up to bed early. Yep, you should be prioritizing your child. I love the awareness that you're starting to bring into this. What else do we say to ourselves in these moments? I'm so unreliable. Yeah, that's so true, Jessica. It's something we catch ourselves doing, but we often never say out loud, right? And I have no doubt you will not be the only one on the call thinking that. Is this just my stage or my parenting? Oh, yeah, I know that one. Saying crappy stuff to ourselves, yeah. And you can really start to see how we might not be aware of this, but how we can often say these really hurtful things to ourselves. And what I notice in here is this language of should, and I've started to talk about it a little bit too. Because every time we use the should language, I should be doing this or I should be doing that, it's actually subconsciously shame. So shame is should language, and something maybe you want to just tuck into your back pocket and notice every time I tell myself should, maybe I'm shaming myself. And remember, shame is when we're attacking our personal identity. That's when we tell ourselves, I'm a bad person. Not I did a bad thing, I'm a bad person. Cool. Alrighty. So how do we break this cycle? How do we do something about this pressure load that sits at the bottom of the invisible load we're talking about? Well, when I first became a mum, I used to think, I just need more me time. You know, this is what social media tells us, right? Prioritize you. Go and get some self-care. So I remember, well, maybe this time last year, and I think Elsie would have been about 10 months, there was a 2-hour evening spring yoga class. It was just before bedtime. It was like 3:30 to 5:30. I was like, perfect. This is what I need. Self-care is the answer. but just before I went to yoga, I made sure that everyone had everything they needed. So did Elsie have purees? Did she have milk pumped? I made sure everyone was under control. And then when I was at yoga, rather than doing downward dog and being nice and relaxed, I was thinking, I wonder if they're all happy. How's bedtime going? How's dinner time going? My mind was elsewhere. I was constantly going, what's that like? And then instead of leaving that yoga class feeling nice and relaxed and calm, I jumped in the car and being like, I've got to get home. I've got to give Elsie that last breastfeed of the day. And so what I realized is I wasn't alone in that. Maybe it's, some mums who are a little bit have older children, maybe it's younger children. We're often told self-care is the answer. But if self-care was the answer, it would have worked. So what was actually going on for me in that moment that made self-care not the answer? Well, it's about the mental freedom. It's about having self-care or prioritizing time for ourselves with mental freedom, the freedom to actually enjoy the self-care, the freedom to let go of everything we should be doing. And here's the thing about mental freedom. Most people, 90% of people, are totally unaware that they're living their life on what I call autopilot. Just drop into the chat box maybe a Y or a no. Y for yes, N for no. Have you heard of autopilot? I'd love to know. Have you heard of this concept of autopilot? Cool. So as I said at the start, some of this might be new to you, some of it might not be not. But if you haven't heard of autopilot, this is what I mean. Living on autopilot means we repeat our same thoughts, feelings, and behaviors without ever stopping to ask ourselves, is this actually helpful? Autopilot often looks like there might be times at work or there'll be times at your kids and go, I want to respond differently to the situation, but we end up reacting the same way. And that's a really good example of autopilot. We often don't know how we end up reacting. We just know we're reacting. And that's autopilot in action. And autopilot in action can often also look like our bodies being present with our kids or our bodies being present at work, but our brain will be elsewhere. Maybe at work, our brain is with our kids. Maybe when we're with our kids, our brain is at work. That's autopilot. So it's about being in this default way of thinking, feeling, and behaving. And here's the thing, how we get our minds off autopilot to become the conscious observer is through, can anyone guess? This is a bit like my Wordle. Can anyone guess? Maybe put in the chat box what this word is. Awareness. Yeah, thanks, Joe. We bring self-awareness. And a lot of people say to me, Francie, I'm already self-aware. But this is what I truly mean by self-awareness. I mean awareness of our thoughts, our beliefs, our triggers, the stories we tell ourselves, the past decisions, our inner critic, our traumas, feeling, behavior, choices, values, subconscious patterns. And this can feel a lot to become aware of. But how we start to bring self-awareness, to get our minds off autopilot, to start to reduce the noise of our inner critic and let go of some of the pressure is through curiosity. Now, curiosity is this beautiful thing that really allows us to be the mindful observer. And here's how it works. So often when we're that strong, independent woman and something happens, maybe there's heavy emotions, maybe someone hurts themselves, maybe you snap at the kids. When we're that strong, independent woman, we're so often quick to jump in, to fix things, to make things better, that we don't realize we're on autopilot. But when we can be curious, what happens is we create space between something happening, a stimulus, and a response. We create space. And in that space of curiosity, that's when we can often find a different perspective. that's when we can often find a reframe. Maybe we can see a different perspective of why my colleague is now snapping at me, or maybe why my child is behaving the way they're behaving. Or if I go back to myself with Elsie in the pram, why I felt like I was at capacity. Suddenly, when we stop and pause with curiosity, we create the space. And in that space, that's when we become the mindful observer and we can choose a new way of thinking, which creates a new way of feeling, which creates a new behavior. And one of the things I love most about curiosity, especially when we're talking about working motherhood, is when we're curious, one of the things that it often brings up is self-compassion. And I think self-compassion might be one of the most underrated things in working motherhood, because in working motherhood, the reality is it's hard. There's times when you're going to be pulled between work and kids, and you'll feel like you're not doing enough to anyone. And often it's not something for us to solve. Rather, it's a situation for us to be compassionate about and realize, I am in a really tough season of life, and that's okay. So rather than putting more pressure on ourselves that I should be nailing it through a tough season of life, instead we can be self-compassionate and go, actually, this is a really hard time, and I'm going to take that pressure off myself and know it's okay not to get it right. And so I'm going to hand this back over to you again. I want you to get curious again with that thought that you wrote down before. So when, thinking about when you're stressed, triggered, or whatever, when you think that thought, I want you to get a little bit curious. What is that feeling? And when I'm thinking about what that feeling is, I want you to think about, where does it show up in my body? If you're feeling overwhelmed, what is that like? If you're feeling stressed, what is that like? For me, I know frustration is this feeling that comes up from my feet, up through my body, and it's like I'm just getting squeezed and squeezed and squeezed and squeezed. So I want you to think about for yourself, when you think from that inner critic, from that place of pressure, how does it feel? And when you feel that way, how do you normally respond? So I want you just to start to bring some awareness, starting to shift off autopilot, starting to become the mindful observer. I know for myself, and I'm far from perfect. I will have moments maybe where I have a thought where I'm being the default parent for everything, and I'm feeling frustrated and overwhelmed because my husband can't see what I'm doing, maybe in that part of that invisible load. And I'll notice that thought that, why am I the default parent? Why am I doing it all? Then I'll notice a sense of frustration. And then I'll notice that subconsciously I will, have the behavior that I might snap at him. I might judge him. I might tell him, why aren't you doing this? You should do that. Or when he's parenting in a way that's different to me, I might go and overcorrect him. And I notice I'm often doing that. If I think about myself, when I'm in a position of being the default parent and I haven't necessarily communicated or said to him, hey, this is what I'm thinking about, or this is the load I'm carrying, and I'm holding on to it all myself because I'm telling myself it's just easier if I do it all, as opposed to letting him in and actually asking for help. I don't know if that's relatable to a lot of other people as well. Yeah. But I love what's coming through. Everyone out for a walk, get outside, go for a walk. Yeah, that is our reset method. And so often we have our reset methods and they're great, but it's about also bringing awareness to, when are these moments that I might be putting pressure on myself? Remind myself of what's important. Totally, Victoria. I'm all with you on that one. So let's dive into the third and final part. So how do we get more capacity back? Now we know that the pressure load, or the bit that sits at the bottom of the invisible load, is adding stress, this low-level stress survival state. And that the low-level survival stress state is often activated when we're on autopilot and we haven't quite yet activated that mindful curiosity. How do we actually get more capacity back? And I just want to tell you a little bit of a story back in 2020. where I found myself totally burnt out with chronic fatigue. I found myself in a situation where I would have lows in my life where I couldn't get out of bed for 2 or 3 weeks. I was starting a new job and I had to negotiate down to 2 or 3 days a week because I knew I couldn't work full time. And I went to the doctor and I was sort of just told, this is how life is, Francie. And at the same time, I had all of these weird symptoms. I thought I had irritable bowel. I thought I had bladder problems. I had feet problems. And as I said, the doctor said to me, this is just how life is, including the specialist. So I decided I would go about fixing myself, and I tried meditation, medication, rest, relaxation, but none of it actually worked until I made a choice to go on a course to realign my mind-body connection. Now, when I went on this mind-body connection course, I couldn't walk more than about 2K. And then 6 weeks later, I ran a half marathon. And what I realized through that experience of that mind-body connection is where our attention goes, our energy flows. And what I mean by this is your energy doesn't come from doing more, it comes from not leaking it. And when we're thinking about energy leaks, this is what I mean. When we're thinking from the past and we're in the mum guilt, telling ourselves, I should have, we leak energy. We spend our precious energy and capacity there. When we're in the future, thinking about the worst case scenario, what might go wrong, do the kids have swimming, do the kids have togs for swimming, we leak energy. And when we're operating from this place of the inner critic saying, I'm not good enough, we leak energy. And we often don't think about these subtle energy leaks until you have a situation like me where you completely burn yourself out with chronic fatigue. And because the only place that we can restore our energy and our capacity is actually back in the present moment. And I'm going to take you through a little bit of an exercise now that will kind of help this make sense. So what I'm going to invite you to do now is maybe just to shut down your eyes if you can, and just to go get a little bit curious and go inwards. And I want you just to think for a moment of a time, maybe in the last week or today, where you snapped at the kids. Maybe you snapped at your husband, or maybe you felt frustrated with your colleague. And I want you just to kind of bring that situation to mind and sort of play it over. And as you play that situation over, I just want you to notice what is happening in your body. And how was your energy as you sit with that in your body? And now I want you to imagine the future. Imagine maybe what you're thinking about. Oh, after school care, maybe it's daycare pickup, maybe it's organizing what's coming up for the weekend, maybe it's you're jumping into worst case scenario thinking. I want you to just think about something about the future, maybe something you're worried about, concerned about, or something you need to be planning. And I want you just to notice what comes up as in your body again, what comes up with your energy as you anticipate and you think about that. Angry, frazzled, centered, calm. I love that awareness, Heather. Yeah. What else do we notice? I feel tired. Yeah, you won't be alone in that one. Past, my energy disappeared and I felt flat. Future, I felt tense and anxious but exhausted. Yeah. So what we can start to notice with our energy is when we're thinking from the past, and maybe that's overthinking and guilt, we leak energy. You know, when we're in that mum guilt, when we're in the shaming, when we're putting that pressure on ourselves or beating ourselves up because we didn't meet our own high standards or expectations, we leak energy. We give away our most precious resource in life simply by how we're thinking. And when we're in the future and we're worrying and we're catastrophizing and we're thinking about everything we should be doing or I need to be doing, that I'm the only one doing, that no one else can see me doing, we leak again our most precious resource, which is our energy. And this is the wonderful thing about the present moment. Being in the present moment isn't about emptying our mind, isn't about making that inner critic disappear. It's about choosing where to put your energy, thought by thought. Because often, you know, high-performing mums say to me, oh, once I've found my inner critic and I've found that pressure that I'm putting on myself, I'm just going to get rid of it. But what we resist persists. Instead, if we can bring that real curiosity to the present moment, get our minds off autopilot and become present in the now, that's when we can conserve our energy and choose to respond, not react. And that might mean even when we rupture, even when we snap, it's not about what happened in that moment. It's about going, how do I want to respond after I've snapped or things haven't gone to plan so I can conserve my energy for the rest of the day, so I can let go of that pressure that I'm putting on myself. And I want to leave you with these kind of 3 steps to really increase your capacity. So the first one, you know, when we've had these moments where life's not going to plan, and I think so many of you already have them because I've come through the chat box, is taking that moment to pause. You know, bringing that curiosity, bringing yourself back to the present moment. When things aren't going to plan, and maybe that's with your colleagues, maybe that's with your kids, maybe that's with your partner, just pause. And then we want to get curious. Check in with that thought, asking yourself, where is this thought coming from? What might this thought be telling me? What else might be going on? And when we can do that, we can get our minds off autopilot. And when we can get our minds off autopilot, that's when we can see another perspective. And when we can see another perspective, we can choose to act from a new thought or not. And when we can choose to act from a new thought that's coming from a place of curiosity, not fear, that's when we can start to bring our energy back. That's when we can start to stop the leaks, those energy leaks that sit at the bottom of the invisible load. And so here's my final question for you. What's the first moment this evening you can practice being present instead of running on autopilot? So, and what might this do to your capacity and energy? So just start to bring your mind to this evening, and maybe when you're normally on autopilot, you know, maybe like some of my clients who drive home from work, thinking about all the what ifs, what if could go wrong. Or maybe you're like one of my clients who used to get really frustrated when things didn't go to plan, and then spend a lot of time telling myself, oh, my kids should be able to behave like this. Like they're 7 and 8, they should be able to be helpful. And we realized that language was adding the expectations and pressure. I want you to stay curious with yourself. Where could you just start to notice your mind is on autopilot at night? And so the thing I asked you at the start was, how prepared are you to integrate over information? And that number you dropped in the chat box or you wrote down for yourself was your personal accountability measure. And now we're coming to the end of this workshop. I want you to just make that personal accountability a little bit deeper. What is that one thing you're going to choose to integrate today, from today? Maybe it's becoming the observer. Maybe it's writing, thinking about tonight, actually truly thinking about that moment, making it really specific and going, maybe that's where I can get my mind off autopilot. Or maybe it's getting curious and going, what might my energy leaks be? I want you just to think for yourself, what am I going to integrate over taking more information? Because as I said, the most successful people in life know they can gather more and more information from workshops like this, from books, from podcasts, but successful people take what they hear and make the choice to integrate it. So what are you going to choose to integrate? You might want to pop it in the chat box. You might want to just write it down for yourself. And finally, if you want a little bit of support with that integration, what I'm going to do is email all you wonderful people is to I'm just looking at the chat box, sorry. 3 journal prompts you can use that take you through the different areas, sort of like a self-coaching resource that will help you go through, where might I be pushing pressure on myself? Where might I be living from a place of autopilot? And how might I restore my energy? So I'm going to send that out, and it's my invitation for you just to get a little bit more curious, to help bring a little bit more capacity back to this juggle of working motherhood. Because as I said at the start, it is a juggle, but what we want to do is lighten the load. Now today, if you've gone, oh, I've really liked what I've heard, I'd love to go a little bit deeper. I just want to let you know I have an Empowered Mums Blueprint 8-week coaching program. Now, this coaching program is not going to run for a while now because I'm 37 weeks pregnant, but it's something that I want to just pop on your radar if it might feel like the right thing for you. Because in this program, we really go deep on stopping the overthinking and the mum guilt. We let go of the thoughts that keep us stuck, and we start to bring back some of that energy and focus that you want in your day. We start to put in some practical systems that actually lighten the load, and then we help you feel more present and calm. And one of my clients who've literally just finished the program, I'm really, really proud of her. This is one of the outcomes she got. And she just talked about, how the course for her helped her address her guilt, how it had helped her let go of some of those limiting beliefs, and bring back a little bit more confidence from a career perspective, relationship perspective, and parenting. Now, if that's something that you're like, maybe I'm a little bit curious about, I just invite you to drop me an email. I'll send you an email after this. Maybe you want to just message me on Teams, or you can also connect with me on LinkedIn. This is my QR code to connect with me on LinkedIn, and we can just pop you onto that wait list. But finally, this is the place where we start to wrap up. And what I think we've got enough time. What we'll do is we'll just open up for comments, questions, maybe something you want to challenge me on. Maybe there's something you want to get a little bit more curious with. So maybe you want to use the chat box, or also just come off mute. Is there something you'd like to share, something you'd like to ask? Okay, what was the app I mentioned about managing scheduling? It's called the PAM app. PAM. That stands for personal. I don't know, personal something or other, but yeah, it's new. It's also really cool because it's a New Zealand founder, and she's just got a whole heap of funding for it as well. Any other questions? Oh. I think in that case, Eliza, we can wrap up.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Francie, for your time today. And as Francie mentioned, she'll send you an email later on, as well as the recording of this webinar. And if you're interested in staying in touch, you can also sign up to her newsletter. But no, thank you for registering, and thanks, Francie, again for sharing with us today. Hope you all have a great afternoon. Thanks.
Thank you.